Attention, you're listening to the Todd Huff Radio Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk radio. Be advised that the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. Here's your conservative, but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Ah, yes, my friends. Hour number 2, last hour of the week, second hour of the day. I appreciate you joining us, being here. It's my pleasure to have you tune in today. I want to maybe shift gears a little bit here. I've still got a soundbite. We talked about Biden on The View at the end of last hour. I've got another soundbite of Biden. I'm trying to decide how I want to do this, and I'm actually going to make a game time decision here. We're going to put that off because I want to spend the bulk of our time up front. You know, the first segment is the one that I can get most deeply into things. It's the biggest block of time that we have. And I've learned that if there's something I really want to get to, it's best to get here now. And so I want to, in this segment, and I will get to these other things time permitting. I don't know how long we're going to be talking about this. I know some basic things I want to cover, but I don't always know how long it's going to take. So we're going to start here. We're going to start with Republicans in Congress that are not pushing to codify, basically turn into law the cuts made by DOGE. This is a problem. I can tell you that it is a completely predictable problem, and this is not shocking to me, but I want to shine some light on this, and I want to show you, I want to talk with you about who the people are who are still not on the side of the American taxpayer, who are still not on the side of President Trump. That's where I want to start. I've got some other things, again, as I've alluded to, I would like to get to, hopefully, and I will, as the program comes together today, my friends. Before I do that, though, let's talk for a moment about seafood. And this is not just any seafood. This is not your run-of-the-mill seafood that you're going to get at the, one of the frozen food parts of the grocery store. This is something that is unique. It is fresh, wild-caught Alaskan seafood. It comes from Kenai fish, and that's spelled Kenai. That'll matter here in a moment. But these folks are the real deal when it comes to providing seafood to you, a lover of seafood here in this great nation. Their salmon comes from the pristine waters of the Kenai and Castle Loft rivers. They've got sockeye salmon, they've got king salmon, they've got coho salmon. It's all been vacuum sealed. So it's harvested, it's prepared, it's vacuum sealed, and it's shipped next day air to lock in that fresh, just caught flavor. But they have a whole lot more than salmon. They've also got halibut. They've got a halibut that, of course, has a mild, sweet flavor that can be prepared any number of ways. They also have a variety of shellfish, king crab, snow crab, scallops. They've got rockfish. Folks, they've got a ton of seafood that's fresh, wild-caught from the Alaskan waters. It can get to you in no time at all, and I think you're going to love it. Kenai Fish is also a family-owned business. They care about quality. They care about what they're putting in those packages. And you can get those packages by going to KenaiFish.com. Again, that's Kenai, KenaiFish.com. Today, you can use promo code TODD when shopping, and you will save 15% on your purchase. That's KenaiFish.com, KenaiFish.com. Friends, you will taste the difference, and I think you'll be hooked. Kenai Fish, that is a total pun intended, by the way. KenaiFish.com, KenaiFish.com, promo code Todd. All right, so that being said, let me get to this. This has been about a week since I've not been able to talk about this Or I don't know. There's a lot going on. There's trade deals. There's, still fights about spending, and there are issues with, of course, deportations and all these fights that are happening. We had the issue, or the selection, I should say, of the Pope, and we talked about that this week. But this is something that's been back there, kind of percolating on the back burner, at least for me, as far as what we've talked about. This is at the end. This is the Independent. I actually found it at Yahoo News. So Yahoo.com headline here: Republicans are telling the White House that DOGE cuts will not be permanent. Written by Gustav Killander. Anyway, the White House is encountering pushback from congressional Republicans as the administration works to enshrine the cuts instituted by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency into law. Congressional Republicans have said in private conversations that it would be a stretch to codify even a small part of the cuts put in place by Musk, according to the Washington Post. Both the courts and Congress are refusing to legally protect the cuts pushed through by Musk, and the White House has few options to ensure the reductions have a lasting effect. So let me pause. Let me pause and summarize what's going on. So we have an election, right? We have a campaign, we have elections, and we elected President Trump. And there's also people we elected to Congress and to the Senate. Republicans, after this election, walked away with a very, very tiny 119th Congress, a very, very slim majority in the House of Representatives, and a slim majority in the Senate as well. But they technically have, when it comes to things that can fall under budget reconciliation, they have political power because they're not subjected to the filibuster. If they want to institute other ideas that can't be pulled through a budget reconciliation process where it's not subjected to the filibuster, they're going to have a harder time because they're going to have to get 7 votes, I think, assuming all Republicans also vote to move an issue or a vote to actually take place in the Senate versus being filibustered and there not being the invocation of cloture. All right, so that is kind of the lay of the land. So you have Republicans who are elected, I would say, for a very particular purpose. You know, the left, anytime someone loses an election, the next thing that people do after they come to grips with it, which sometimes they're in denial, right? They're angry, they're going through the bargaining process, all of that. But once they come to grips with it, the next thing that usually happens from the party that lost the election, they call into question whether or not there is a mandate. And what does that mean? A mandate is when the party that won cast a vision, and it's clear that that's why people voted for that particular party, was to implement that policy or those series of policies, that particular vision for the country in the case of a federal election. And so the side that loses wants to say, look, we don't have a mandate. There were other factors involved. But the truth is, Trump, when you look at and you think about Trump was elected on some very, very specific things. Trump has clear mandates on things. One of those was to secure the border and to engage in the process of deportations. Trump also was empowered, was voted by people to clean up Washington, D.C., to drain the swamp, if you will. Now, that takes a couple of different shapes. One of those shapes is the amount of money that is being wasted or spent fraudulently or just, maybe abused as well. And so this situation, these are the things that Donald Trump was voted for. These were part of the campaign. These were things that Trump was out there talking about. None of this is a surprise. It's not like he talked about a certain agenda and now he's implementing another one. He talked about addressing core fundamental problems with our economy. He talked about tariffs from the debate stage or from his rally stage. None of this has shocked anybody. Well, it might have shocked the left and the media, which is incredible. It's incredible to behold because Trump was out there saying these things. None of this should come as a surprise, but yet it does for the radical left and the media, or at least they want you to think that so they can say this isn't what we voted for. They've already started that, by the way. Remember, they wanted people to believe that there's a big migration away from Trump. We didn't vote for this. What's this guy doing? Not what I voted for at all. In fact, that's one of the reasons I shared the polling numbers with you. I think these are the right numbers, but again, I defer back to the previous program where I talked about this in more detail. Probably, I think this was last week or maybe the last full week of April. But nonetheless, there was a poll that was conducted and asked people how many people regretted or would change their vote in the presidential election back from this November. How many people would do that? And it's pretty consistent that people are content with their votes. I think it was 94% would vote for Trump again and 93% would vote for Kamala again. Crazy as that might sound, but that's the lay of the land. And so this is not a surprising thing to Republicans, conservatives, to people who pay attention, but it is a tactic that's used by the left. So the argument here, we've got three distinct branches of government. We've got the executive branch, we've got the legislative branch, we've got the judicial branch. Now, the judicial branch was not on the ballot this past November. It was indirectly insofar as the president will be appointing people to the judicial branch, but we weren't voting for federal judges and Supreme Court justices. That's not how that works. In fact, there's a particular reason why it's not done that way. They want to keep the judicial system out of the political system as best they can. It's not completely divorced from it because it's still part of our political system, but trying to keep judges from making decisions based upon political pressures. That's kind of the vision here. The executive branch and Congress can deal with the political pressures and all that stuff, have fights about what we want to do regarding legislation and policies and those sorts of things. But the Supreme Court, it should really be more, I should say, less emotional. It should be very, kind of matter of fact. This is what the law says. This is how we think it applies. If you don't like it, then Congress, you can change the law. The president, you can sign those changes into law, but we're just telling you what the law says and we're applying it. That's how this should work in a perfect world. And of course, it's up to you to decide how often that actually happens. But you got Congress who has to spending comes from Congress, right? Spending comes from Congress. So they're the ones that the president can introduce a budget and make his legislative priorities what they are, and then you can go from there. But the bottom line is the president can't just start spending money. He has to do it under the permission of Congress. Congress is the one who decides where the money's going to go. But what Trump has done with DOGE is he said, look, Congress has allocated all these funds to us, but we don't need them. We're wasting money here. We've got too many people in this department there. Congress has asked the executive branch to do these certain things, and I think we can do it with less. And so that's the position of the administration. That's where DOGE comes in, and they're saying, look, we've got a ton of waste here. In fact, I think it was 5.5%. I don't have the number in front of me. Federal spending in the first quarter dropped. It's around 5.5%. That's pretty significant. 5.5% reduction in spending. Now the media took that to say, well, that's the GDP has shrunk, because technically the GDP in the first quarter had a negative number to that. And there's a formula for the GDP, gross domestic product. And there's two things in there, two factors, two of the 4 or 5 factors that impacted the GDP. It's not as though the economy is struggling. The GDP was negative because government spending is one of those numbers that factors into GDP. And so when government spending was 5.5% less in the first quarter, the GDP took a hit, even though from a common sense perspective, a government that's spending out of control being reined in is a wonderful thing for the U.S. taxpayer. So this is an example where nuance and context is really, really important. It always is, but I would say especially so here, because you have to understand why the factors to show that there's a negative GDP. In fact, if we didn't cut federal spending, and if Trump didn't, the second part of this is if Trump didn't institute these tariffs, I can't say this definitively, but the chances are good that the GDP would not have been in negative territory, because imports and exports are also part of the calculation for GDP. And so the United States took in excess number of imports in the first quarter because of all these tariffs. A lot of people wanted to get products in either before the tariffs or anticipating that tariffs would increase. There were a lot more shipments that came in the first quarter. So you factor all of that in, and you realize that we've got a GDP that was negative in the first quarter, but there's some explanation there that really makes it clear that it's not as bad as you might think that it is. We're just going through the process of cleaning up a mess, and that mess is going to cause temporary issues and problems. So, but back to the main discussion point here. You got the president who's doing everything in his power to do what he was elected to do. And if you take away what the president has done, if you take away what DOGE has done, if you take away what ICE and Customs and Border Patrol have done along the southern border, if you take away what Trump has done regarding tariffs to put pressure on nations to adjust how they do business with this country so that it's in our self-interest to see these things improved. If you take away all those things and you look at Congress and you say, what have they done? The answer is a whopping nothing. Now, as I said, I think off the top, there's certain things they're not going to be able to get done, or it's going to be incredibly, incredibly difficult, virtually impossible, unless you can start moving some Democrats onto the Republican side on these things, at least in the sense that they wouldn't allow for the filibuster to continue in the Senate, blocking any new legislation. But as it pertains to things that can be brought under the reconciliation agreement, the reconciliation bill, as it pertains to spending, this is something that Republicans should be helping Trump do. And they should absolutely be looking to, again, painted that picture that says that the spending cuts came from the executive branch saying, look, we don't need to spend all this money that you've allocated. We can do the job. We're doing our administrative job. We're doing a job of making sure that what we're paying for is in alignment with common sense, reason, and the laws that have been passed. And we don't need to be spending this money, whatever. All those cuts have come through the executive branch's action. And now we've got word, in order for this to be long-term, Congress is going to actually have to pass legislation to rein this in legislatively. So, they're not going to, it doesn't appear, as I just read a moment ago. Continuing here at this article, this comes as several Republicans have faced furious opposition from their constituents during town hall meetings in their districts. Some Republicans have refused to hold such meetings, and others have blamed the opposition from voters on the Democrats. It's probably a mix. There's certainly angry constituents who are Democrats. They've been stirred into a frenzy. I would say most times they don't even truly know completely what they're infuriated about. Some people do. Some people just have different opinions and thoughts than us. But some people are just furious because they can be, and because they've been led to be furious and incited to be furious by the media and the Democrat Party. So Republicans are politically thinking, man, we don't want to step into this mess. Trump doesn't care. Trump's got the pushing the pedal to the metal, but Congress is now dragging its feet. Last month, the article says, Florida Republican Byron Donalds attempted to tell his constituents about the benefits of DOGE as he faced shouting and jeers from voters. We might have played a little bit of this. I don't know. Again, there's been a lot going on, but there have been Republicans who are going back and who are getting backlash from voters. Again, there's always questions. There's always questions about who these folks really are. Are they truly just the Democrats in the district? Are they paid protesters? I think that those are all fair questions. People don't like me saying that sometimes, but I fully 100%. In fact, I've been looking at having someone come on the program. That's what he did. That's what he does, I think, is have, gets protesters. Now I'm not going to get into that at the moment, but there's no doubt that there are people who are paid to do certain things politically, to protest and whatever else. So, but referring here to this town hall meeting that Byron Donalds had in April, going back to the article here, it says, "Are you going to allow me to answer the question?" He asked an audience member. I saw that clip. You might have seen it as well. Republicans have faced outrage from voters concerned about possible cuts to programs such as Medicare and Social Security. Oh my, I get so. This is 100% deceitful. Republicans are not trying to cut Social Security and Medicare. They're just simply not trying to do it. Now, if we find that 10% of the program, I'm just picking numbers. It may not be anywhere near this. It may be, who knows? It could be more than this. In today's world, nothing would surprise me. But if we find that 10% of these programs are the result of fraud, then maybe the fraud part needs cut out. That's not cutting Social Security and Medicare programs that are legitimately being received by Americans, but they don't care about this. It forces us to talk about the narrative, and people only hear the part of this that the media wants them to hear, which is, of course, cuts to Medicare and Social Security. I have to take a break, my friends. Quick timeout is necessary. You're listening here to Conservative Not Bitter Talk. I am your host, Todd Huff. Back here in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. I mentioned that we've temporarily, for the time being, working on some things on the video side of the podcast. We've had to stop it here temporarily. Oz told me during the break, you are a very relaxed version of Todd today. I'm sitting back in the chair here. I had a late night or an early morning. I guess it was an early morning. Happens to me every once in a while. I'm not one who sleeps a lot. I go through my phases where I do sleep 7 or 8 hours. But I think in general, I don't need more than 6 hours maybe for me. It seems about right. I don't know. Sometimes less. Last night this morning I woke up at 3:30. 3:24, I think, is what time it was. And it's hit me. I was awake all day getting the show ready. and at the beginning of this hour, I felt the sleepiness hit me. So I've been a little bit more reclined here in the studio than usual. But anyway, I want to continue what we were talking about regarding the deception of the left and the wimpiness of the Republican Party, the Congress in particular, Congress and Senate. I'll get to that here in a moment, my friends. But I do want to take this opportunity to remind you about Freedom Marketplace. Freedom Marketplace is where you can go to find businesses that are pushing in the same direction that you're pushing. These are businesses that love America. They love American values. They revere the Constitution. They love liberty. They're not going to be supporting woke candidates, leftist causes. In fact, if they do that, they'll be removed from the directory. So you can find businesses there, freedommarketplace.net. It's totally free for you to do this, and it connects you with businesses, again, that are pushing in the same direction you are. It's much better. The reality of the matter is we have businesses out there that are taking profits from the money we've spent with them to undermine our political efforts, to fight against us politically. This marketplace has businesses that are not going to do that. So check it out. freedommarketplace.net is where you can go. Again, freedommarketplace.net. So before the break, I had shared with you, let me pull up where did this article go? What'd I do with it? Tell me I didn't close that. Here we go. I didn't close it. So before the break, I read this line, which I'll repeat because I think it's worth repeating and addressing this clearly, straightforward, in a very straightforward manner and very concisely. Republicans, it says, have faced outrage from voters concerned about possible, there's the little magical word, possible cuts to programs such as Medicare and Social Security. Now, the possible kind of blends into the background, I should say, because that's not really the focal point here. That's there for in the future when they don't actually cut Social Security and Medicare. They're not going to cut the payments made to people. They're not going to do that. They might cut the waste, fraud, and abuse from it, which I would think any taxpayer, any reasonable American would want them to do this. They, the Republicans, are not here to cut people's legitimate Social Security payments. They're not here to cut Medicare. They're not going to do that. They have made this abundantly clear. None of this is even remotely on the table. The only thing that's on the table is waste, fraud, and abuse. And so if there are people who are getting Social Security payments, if there are people, say illegal aliens, for example, which has been reported, who are getting some of these entitlement programs, that's going to stop. That's going to stop. And if there's enough of that to show cuts in the program, then there will be cuts to the program. But it's not cuts to the legitimate part of the program. This is intentional. They do this about everything. They do this about due process, which that's something we've talked about a lot. It's one of the things that Kash Patel was fighting with who was he fighting with? Maybe Senator Merkley from Oregon, I think. He was fighting with him about due process in a hearing earlier this week. But this is deceitful. They are lying and misleading the American people here. They, the media, they, the Democrat Party. Continuing here, the chaos at some town halls prompted some lawmakers to move to a phone-in format or avoid holding meetings at all, following advice from the National Republican Congressional Committees. Long story short, it's the next sentence, so let me just read this. Robert Shea is a Republican who previously worked at the White House Budget Office. None of the activities of the DOGE have heretofore had any impact on the budget, the debt, or the deficit. Until Congress acts, those savings don't really become real, he told the Post. So, there's going to be fights about this. Trump might claim exactly what I was talking about earlier, that, hey, we have discretion. Just because you've budgeted the money doesn't mean that we have to spend it. If we're doing, if we're carrying out the responsibilities we have and we save ourselves money, I think there's at least a case to be made for that. Congress shouldn't say, here's the money, and someone come back and say, well, we accomplished the goal and we didn't spend every penny. Surely Congress wouldn't say, well, go spend it. That doesn't seem to make sense. That's not how you or I would function. But anyway, so Congress, in order for this to fully and truthfully, completely take shape, Congress is going to have to get involved at some point, if for no other reason, to make this ongoing, and potentially, again, in cases where funds have been approved and contracts may have been canceled, there's going to be some things that they're going to certainly say The president doesn't have the authority to not spend the money on this if Congress didn't adjust the budget. So we've gone through all of this work for what? For what? So we've got deceptive Democrats and we have weak-kneed, wimpy Republicans in Congress. You know, I just think that it's worth settling down here for a moment and talking about this. Because as I've shared on this program, you go back to the early days of this program, back in 2016, 2015, when we started the podcast, 2016 when we started, converted this to a radio show, or added radio stations, however you want to look at it. That was back during the first Trump campaign. And I remember saying on this program a lot, I remember saying that there were two main reasons why people were aggravated with the Republican Party. One is elected Republicans aren't as conservative as the voters would like them to be, number one. And actually, it's not even in order. It's either or, can be number one or number two. But the other one is they're just wimpy. Maybe they are as ideologically conservative as voters want them to be, but they don't have the fight within them. Because I remember saying that is what was so attractive about President Trump. It was a combination of things. It was his demand that we build the wall. It was his rejection of the prototypical political campaign. He refused to become a normal politician, which Americans hate anyway. And just this desire, this willingness to continue to fight for things and push for things that normal Republicans would have stopped pushing for long, long ago. And it became clear to people as they watched him over time, as they stood on that debate stage in 2016, when they were all asked, who here is committing to vote for whoever the eventual Republican nominee is for president? They all raised their hand except for one guy standing at the podium. Like, I don't know. I don't know that I can do that. It should be me as the nominee. I'm not going to commit to voting for these guys. I'm not even sure that what some of them think yet. I'm here to win a campaign. I'm not committing to that. Some of these guys may not be worthy of my vote. I've listened to what they've said. I've watched how they've governed, or, you know, the things that they've done during their time, some of them in public office. But this connected and resonated with people because it was real. Those were the problems. And now we've gone through all of this. We've gone through a decade of that, of the demonization, the weaponization, impeachment 1, impeachment 2, Russia, all this stuff, right? Trump's charged with this, criminal that, mugshot here, assassination attempt there, all these things. And we're back in some ways to square one, where the Republicans are wimpy again. Americans are dying for strong leadership, and it is not coming, my friends, from the Republicans in Congress. I have to say, you know, I'd be careful sometimes to criticize Republicans because they're the only ones that are going to make things happen politically. But I got to tell you, Speaker Mike Johnson, to me, massive disappointment. Massive disappointment. And I'm not saying that I had super high expectations. I'm just saying he's not done any better, really, than some of the other folks who have been speaker. I have to take a time out there, my friends. Sit tight. You're listening to Conservative Not Bitter Talk. I am your host, Todd Huff. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. I think I would amend what I said at the end of last segment. He's been marginally better than some of the others. You know, I go back and I think about these things. You know, there's so many things that happen, so many things that bombard us, so many things that vie for our attention. And the cycle it never stops, right? You just go from one thing to the next, and sometimes you don't have time to do an analysis of what just happened. But I go back to when Matt Gaetz, remember, the reason we have Speaker Johnson is because Matt Gaetz forced McCarthy's hand. Matt Gaetz moved to vacate the chair, the speakership. He made that happen. Lauren Boebert, she was involved with that. And there was a lot of fighting. And all that fighting to go from Kevin McCarthy to Mike Johnson, who I do believe is better than Kevin McCarthy, but I don't know how much. And I look at this and I think, this is what's happened. This took a ton of political capital. I mean, Matt Gaetz is no longer a representative. Matt Gaetz was first introduced, nominated as Trump's attorney general. And he's not any of those things right now. I'm not saying Matt Gaetz' days in politics or whatever are over, but I am saying that he invested a lot and he made this happen. It wouldn't have happened without him, and I'm not sure how much more, and this is not an insult to him. It's just to say the realities are, I don't know how much more we accomplished with him than we would have accomplished with Kevin McCarthy. So more to say about this, my friends. But before I do that, listen, I'm talking to a bunch of patriots out there in this audience. You love this country. You care about this country. And you know that we're in for one heck of a fight. We are in for one heck of a fight. It's got multiple fronts. We've talked about this, the 7 pillars of propaganda. But underneath, all that stuff matters. But underneath all of that, it's all academic. If we don't have the energy or the health to stay involved and engaged in the fight. That's where Solti comes in. It's an all-natural product that helps with your heart health. It helps lower cholesterol, according to science anyway. Science has spoken. The studies show it. And it may be able to help you lower your your cholesterol as well, and be good for your heart. Our heart is something that is incredibly important. Heart disease is a killer in this country. And taking steps to take care of our health, especially as we age, and that aging begins earlier than we might think. It did for me. It hit me up the side of the head quicker than I thought it would. So stay proactive, my friends. It's a very affordable way to do this. I take the product, Soltea.com, SOLTEA, promo code TODD is how you can get a special that gets you 50% off your first 3-month supply, and it gets you free shipping. That's Soltea.com, SOLTEA, promo code TODD. Take care of your heart, my friends. We need you in the fight for sure. The only thing you have to lose are those high cholesterol points. But just in closing here today, as we look at the final few minutes of this week, which I know is, a tough time because this program is going to be off for the next few days. But the reality here is that we have people in Congress who are still wimpy. They're still wimpy. Even with Trump at the helm. The Republican Party, I know some people really like certain candidates. I'm hopeful for some people, but I'm going to tell you that if you're asking me, when I look up at the folks who are holding political office today, I see Donald Trump and I see a massive gap between him and other folks after him who might be stepping up to the plate politically. But I'll say Marco Rubio's done a good job. I'm hopeful of J.D. Vance, but I look at this and I think this is the one guy. The one guy has made all of this happen. And Congress is set on its hands. The Senate, they're not doing what they were elected to do. They don't respect you. They don't respect me. They don't like how Trump has turned things on its head. And I'm telling you, and you know this is, in a way, for some of these Republicans, one big game of run out the clock. Just run out the clock. Just delay it. You might have to come out and say some things to encourage the base, but at the end of the day, they're looking out and they're saying, we have less than 4 years. We've got whatever it is, 3 years and 8 months of this or whatever it is. And that's how some of these folks look at this. And let Trump take all the attention, let all the focus be on the tariffs, let all the focus be on, DOGE, but then we don't do anything with it. How could you listen? How can you listen and watch and have these revelations of what DOGE has uncovered and then literally do nothing about it? How can you do that? You're not worthy to be an elected official if you sit there and you see what we've learned and you do nothing about it. But that's what we've got, my friends. And I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer here, but we've got to hold these folks accountable. That's the good news, is that these folks are highly influenced by people who are going to hold them accountable. That's what we can do. That's what we should do. I've got to go, though. I'm out of time. Thanks so much for listening. Have a wonderful weekend. SDG.